Hi friends, welcome to this latest episode of the Nationalist View. Today we have with us a very illustrious guest. We have with us Dr. Shilparna Pathak ji. Dr. Pathak, thank you so much for taking out time from your busy schedule and being with us. Dr. Pathak is an expert on China. She is currently Executive Director, Center for Northeast Asian Studies, O.P. Jindal Global University. She has done her doctoral studies in Jawaharlal Nehru University on Chinese studies, and then she is one of the few scholars in India who basically comment on or who track China, but who also know Chinese language. She has studied Chinese literature and Chinese language in China from 2011 to 2013. She was a general advanced research scholar there. And today we are going to talk about China's play in Bangladesh because Bangladesh is very crucial for India. And there's a lot of talk about US deep state being active there. But there's not much talk about China, though China continues to be a very, very important and significant player there. So, Dr. Pathak, welcome once again. And my first question is that if you can set up a little bit of a historical context for China's presence in Bangladesh. So, but before we'll break down this conversation into two parts. Before Yunus regime took over, ousting Sheikh Hasina, what was basically China's position at that time, and then during the Yunus regime, how China factor is playing out there and the way forward. So, if you can set up a little bit of a context for our viewers.
Right. Thank you so much for having me on board, and it's a pleasure talking to you. Just briefly about how China-Bangladesh relations have been. When Bangladesh was formed in 1971, China was on the opposite side. China was not in favor of the creation of Bangladesh. In fact, it was supporting Pakistan completely. So India and China we found ourselves on the two opposite sides of the spectrum because China was clearly siding with Pakistan, whereas India was siding with Bangladesh. So that's the historical background. But over the years, a lot of things have changed, and China has a very flourishing embassy in Dhaka. Bangladesh has, one in Beijing. It has consulates in Hong Kong and Kunming. Both countries are the members of the Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar Forum. Economically, China is a heavyweight in Bangladesh. In terms of defense ties, well, China figures as the number one player in Bangladesh. So roughly, this has been the case. After the ouster of Sheikh Hasina and after the revolution in Bangladesh, China's relationship with the Yunus-led government has been steadily strengthening. In fact, as of yesterday, Bangladesh is being wooed by China because ties with India are clearly fraying, and there was a 22-member Bangladeshi delegation of political leaders, civil society activists, academics, journalists, who have all begun a 10-day visit to China. So the proposals are that they're going to have talks with the Chinese government officials, with senior members of the ruling Communist Party, etc. So China has been trying to, of course, fill in the gap which is there, given the fact that India and Bangladesh do not have the best of ties at the moment. Since Muhammad Yunus took office as the chief advisor on August 8th last year, following the ousting of former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, China has been showing a lot of signals as to how it wants to improve its ties and take it to newer levels. So China wasted no time in engaging with the new interim government. And as soon as this new interim government came in on August 9th, 2024, the Chinese Foreign Ministry, in fact, welcomed the formation of the Yunus administration, emphasizing its policy of non-interference, expressing a desire to deepen comprehensive strategic cooperative partnership, which was established during Sheikh Hasina's tenure. Now, this partnership was formalized actually in July 2024 when Sheikh Hasina was visiting Beijing, and it has provided a foundation for China to pivot very quickly to the new leadership. And by August 25th, Chinese ambassador to Dhaka, Ambassador Yao Wan, he met Yunus, signaling Beijing's intention to maintain and to expand ties. During this meeting, Yunus also urged China to relocate solar panel manufacturing plants to Bangladesh, basically a proposal aimed at boosting economic cooperation, supporting Bangladesh's green transition, and he also pushed for increased imports of Bangladeshi goods, collaboration in areas like disaster management and education. Economically, China is already Bangladesh's largest trading partner, and the bilateral trade reached around 24 billion US dollars on an average. Predominantly, these are Chinese exports. Beijing also has a lot of investments in infrastructure, including projects like Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman Tunnel, the Padma Bridge, Rail Link, which are all part of China's Belt and Road Initiative. So the interim government has been requesting Foreign Affairs Advisor Tauhid Hussain during his visit to China to extend loan repayment periods from 20 to 30 years, reducing interest rates from 2 to 3% to just bringing it down to 1%. So all of these actually underscore Bangladesh's reliance on Chinese financing. So it's going to be an interesting way forward. Geopolitically, China's this so-called alignment with the Yunus government is coming at a time when Bangladesh's relations with India have soured, and given the fact that former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has sought refuge in India, she is in India has given her shelter despite Dhaka's displeasure, and because of the fact that there have been a lot of news reportage on the ways in which the Hindu minority has been persecuted in Dhaka. All of these issues have fueled a very anti-India sentiment in Bangladesh. China has capitalized on this, positioning itself as a reliable partner. Just as an example, Beijing engaged not just with the Yunus government, but also with other political actors like Bangladesh's Nationalist Party, Jamaat-e-Islami. They've hosted delegations to broaden the influence. And this visit which I just talked about, the visit which has started as of today, this diverse Bangladeshi delegation which has gone to Beijing, also shows that China wants to keep all its options open in case if the Yunus government steps down and someone else comes in. Elections are supposed to happen sometime this year, maybe the end of this year. If another government comes in, Beijing wants to keep its options open. So it's an interesting point. Not
But how do you, Dr. Pathak, how do you explain for a common person who generally tracks a little bit of geopolitics, if US was instrumental, in the change of regime, or at least we know that US has got a basically good play in Bangladesh with Yunus regime, at least when the Democrats were there. And on the other hand, we see Yunus regime also tilting towards China. So how, if Yunus is, let's say, if Yunus is a puppet of, the US deep state, so how do we explain this, kind of contradiction? Is it that Yunus regime has also, Mohammad Yunus has also kind of, changed his loyalties? How US would be looking at it now?
So, now there's a government change even in the US, and Donald Trump is in power. And he said that, well, he will have to say things. So he said that, it's not the US which has had a hand in the ouster of Sheikh Hasina or the government changes. But then again, he himself has said that, there was a lot of money which was flowing into Bangladesh. That in itself is clear, or it's easy to understand that, heads of state can't really say things that their governments have done. But at the same time, he has said that there was a lot of money which had gone into Bangladesh. Now, Yunus wants to play it smart. He wants to have both US and China together, right? So he also understands that there are a lot of policy changes happening in the realm of geopolitics now that Donald Trump is in power. Of course, Donald Trump wants to make America great again, which is why he's also showing certain sorts of signals to China, saying, he said things like Xi Jinping is a great person. He had invited Xi Jinping to his swearing in ceremony and so on. So it's a bit difficult, just the way it is very difficult for the rest of the world to actually understand what sort of a world order the US, which is the world's most powerful country still, what kind of world order does Donald Trump really want. Yunus is also playing along. He would say that, look, I want development of my country. So which is why I would want peace. I don't want to be caught in the great power rivalry between China and the US. And he wants to leverage both of them. But the fact is that clearly for India, which has been the strongest supporter economically, diplomatically, culturally, in terms of medical tourism and so on, these changes are not really good. Given the fact that anything that goes wrong in Bangladesh it's just blamed on India, right? So that doesn't give a very clear, it doesn't give a good signal as to the sort of future that we might have with Bangladesh. Yunus is not even mentioning India. He's just mentioning China and the US. He knows that, okay, China is a economic heavyweight within Asia. So yes, why not? Why would he not leverage? That's his calculations. At the same time, if he could get certain benefits from the US, he would want that as well for his country. But how willing are China and the US really, in honest, true terms? That is something which we can discuss, in the next few minutes or something.
So, taking forward this point, I also want to understand the prime aim of China in Bangladesh currently. Is it basically to protect its investments, or is it basically to use it as a kind of because of Bangladesh's typical geographical position? There was a lot of tussle between Sheikh Hasina and US also, because US wanted Sheikh Hasina to be part of the Indo-Pacific strategy. Because China's maritime policy is pretty, aggressive there, and Sheikh Hasina was trying to balance between India and China. That is the general perception. So now with China coming into play in US, in Bangladesh, big time. So how do you look at the Indo-Pacific region, or the way China has been aggressively pursuing its maritime policy? Does it give China a little bit of more advantage? And also, coupled with that, okay, US, it's fine. There has been a transition there, and the new government is right now kind of basically going to finalize its Bangladesh policy also. But what about the rest of the Western nations, the European Union and the UK, because Australia is there then, so they also have a big stake, in the Pacific region, and China is a clear threat to them. And so are they? Because I don't see any reaction from their side about what China is doing in Bangladesh.
See, historically also, whenever something happens in South Asia, India's neighborhood, it is only India which comes in to stabilize. Be it any sort of natural disaster, and you can, think about earthquakes in Nepal, water crisis in Maldives, and so on. Whenever something happens, given the fact that it is our neighborhood, it's always India which comes in to stabilize. Theoretically, it's the job of the hegemon, which is the United States of America. It's its responsibility to keep the world, away from disarray. But whenever something happens in South Asia, minus Pakistan, of course, it is always India which comes in, right? And Sheikh Hasina she also was balancing between India and China. Otherwise, it's not possible that, she signed so many agreements with China and all of those projects start taking shape. But at the same time, she was cautious that she does not want any of Bangladesh's engagements with China to create alarms in India. A notable flashpoint in this case is the Teesta River project. Historically, Bangladesh under Sheikh Hasina kept China at arm's length from this contentious issue with India. But now reports have been suggesting that the Yunus government may actually now consider involving China in a multi-purpose Teesta initiative, a move which will alarm India because of its security implications in the region. What is China gaining here? Look, China, as you said, in the Indo-Pacific wants its influence. Why would it want its influence? Well, as everyone knows, to be a global hegemon, one has to be a regional hegemon. The region in which China is situated is Asia. Fortunately or unfortunately, we are also within Asia. But at the same time, while China promises a lot of these investments and economic partnerships, fact also is that India, in the last 10 years at least, has been keeping its promises better in terms of investments or rescuing countries from China's debt traps. Sri Lanka is one perfect example over here. So it is always India. The great power rivalry in South Asia is not between China and the US. It's between India and China. China would want India out, right? So, which is why it would support India out campaigns. It would try to fill in all the gaps, whichever is left behind because of deteriorating ties between India and its neighbors. Otherwise, just to give you an example, what does China gain out of Pakistan? Pakistan is done and dusted. It has nothing really to offer. But it's the same approach basically. Friend's friend is friend, or enemy's enemy is friend. So, that's sort of an approach. The common factor between China's approaches and Pakistan's approaches, it's not really development. Any open source research would tell you that even Pakistan is not faring very well as per China's great BRI projects, etc. But then it will still go on because the common enemy here is India. Because of Bangladesh's strategic location, connecting South and Southeast Asia, guarding the Bay of Bengal, it makes it a key player in China's Indo-Pacific ambitions, along with the BRI. So any pivot by Bangladesh towards India or towards India or towards the US is something which China would not really like. It would threaten these interests. So, which is why China would do everything to get India out of the equation or hit at India's influence within South Asia. That being said, just to give you a real example of what is China really gaining out of here. A few days ago, there was a news which was widely supported that China is very angry because Bangladesh's maps in their educational institutions, in their school textbooks, show Aksai Chin and Arunachal Pradesh as parts of India. So China has said that they consider these two territories as their own. In addition, the textbooks and the survey department's websites have also shown Hong Kong and Taiwan as separate countries, not as part of China. So China is very angry. And now it has communicated that to Bangladesh. Had it been Sheikh Hasina, maybe she would have still held her ground and said that, look, sovereignty is something with which we cannot really tinker, right? And what is an issue between India and China? That's an issue between India and China. So we have to show territories in our school textbooks as disputed or under the control of the countries which actually are in control. Arunachal Pradesh is a sovereign part of India and it always has been, and India is in control. So, logically speaking, why would any other country which is not under Chinese influence show it as a part of China? But now, why is China now saying that Bangladesh needs to rework its maps in school textbooks and so on? Because now China thinks that it has this grasp over Bangladesh, which is why it can dictate terms. In terms of sovereignty, it doesn't augur very well for us, right? Why school textbooks? Because it's trying to reshape the knowledge about sovereign territories of India in the next generation. School kids, if you teach them for the next 10 years that Arunachal Pradesh is not Arunachal Pradesh, it's Sangnan or Southern Tibet, then that's how the approach is going to be. The next generation is going to be the next generation diplomats or world leaders and so on, right? So China would do everything to cut India's influence out. You can see cases in Nepal, in Bangladesh, of course. They've tried even with Bhutan. You can see in Sri Lanka, you can see in Maldives, etc. Which is why there's a concerted effort. And now that things are souring between India and Bangladesh, China will jump in. It's already jumping in. So that's the key thing over here. Southeast Asia, well, there are other countries. There's Taiwan, of course. There's Philippines, which also are very troubled by China's aggression. But given the fact that there's a lot of geopolitical changes which are happening, given the fact that there's a new government in power in the US, everyone is doing a wait and watch. Also, with these countries, the territory in question is not land territory, as is the case with India and China. Also, their armies are not holding guard. Our Indian army is still holding against the PLA at our borders. So these questions matter even more to us because we are in an active conflict. So China would do everything to ensure that India is out.
Do you think that the security scenario in the Indo-Pacific region is going to get worsened with China getting more aggressive?
It's going to get extremely difficult. And given the fact that there are a lot of these murmurings that Donald Trump or the US under Donald Trump is not really going to come to Taiwan's rescue if ever China unleashes a full-blown conflict. The fact is that Taiwan creates semiconductors, which is necessary for a lot of our arms, a lot of our defense equipment, and so on. The fall of Taiwan, heavens forbid if it ever happens, it means it changes the equation a lot in Asia, which is why countries like, other countries besides us, which have active conflicts with China, are actually trying to discuss amongst each other what can we really do, because China's aggression is only going to increase. Now China is sitting and watching how the Russia Ukraine conflict is being addressed by the current Donald Trump administration, and if it sees that situations are in its favor, or if it assumes that there's going to be a similar sort of American approach to, say, Taiwan or to Southeast Asia or to South Asia, as has been the case in Russia and Ukraine, it will only get more aggressive. Look, China has a Middle Kingdom syndrome. The word Chungguo, Chinese name for China, translates directly into Middle Kingdom. When Xi Jinping talks, when he, during his speeches, he doesn't use the term country for China. He uses the term nation. When you use the term nation, it's more in the imagination, or these are not within, say, sovereign borders which are drawn out on paper, right? A country and a nation are two different political science concepts. But just to make it simpler, he wants China to attain that stature of the Middle Kingdom, which it was in the earlier epoch of history. But the problem here is, back then, sovereign borders were not outlined. The epoch of history which we live in, we don't have kingdoms, we have countries, right? But Xi Jinping wants to go back to that, which is why in his China dream, he constantly repeats this. He keeps stating over and over again as to how he wants to regain the lost respect which China had as the Middle Kingdom. How does that fare for us? Boundaries or territories were not really drawn. China has come up with this narrative. It is 5,000 years old, and it has so-called written evidence of it. What evidence is this? Whose imagination is this? It would engulf our territories as well, and every other country's territory. China's ambitions are not going to end. So it's only going to be more difficult. China's economy is crumbling. So this is another question, that with the economy crumbling, does it mean that it can afford that sort of military aggression? It will, because given the fact that, look, China has a lot of its reserves, of foreign exchange reserves, etc. Also, it's trying to retweak or rework the whole economic model which it follows. There might be a lull for the next 5 to 10 years, but then again, given the fact that it's creating a positive image in a lot of these countries, it's going to use the resources of the countries which are influenced by it. Bangladesh would be one of them, if this trend continues. So China is only going to get more and more aggressive. History teaches us that there is a pattern. If you just look at India as well, why is it that over and over again, late 1950s, 1962, 87, Doklam, Galwan, Yangtze Valley, it's just never ending. So I think we need to understand that this is not going to end at all. Even if, heavens forbid, under whatever drunken stupor, even if India says that fair enough, take all the territories. This is just a hypothetical situation. This will never really happen. But even if that were to happen, it's not like China's ambitions would end there. They would just keep increasing further and further and further. So one has to be prepared, irrespective of whether other countries like the US or any other partner is going to come to our rescue or not. We need to be prepared. I think every other country is also doing the same sort of thing. Philippines has its own calculations. Taiwan has its own calculations. India always has had its own calculations, which is why China would try to keep us tied down to South Asia. It would further create problems between our neighbors and us, so that we keep getting weakened. When we have to spend so much of time, energy, resources on, say, just managing, for example, the India-Bangladesh border, because now there's so much of infiltration from there. How do we give full focus onto borders with China, wherein China would continue with its salami slicing? Or Pakistan gets reactivated. Well, it's always been active. So Pakistan does something like that. Issues crop up with Nepal, with Sri Lanka. How are we going to really focus on the contested or the infiltrations by the Chinese PLA, People's Liberation Army? So it's a long plan. It's a long term game. It will try and basically ensure all our neighbors go against us.
I just wanted to touch on another point that in Bangladesh, the current Yunus regime. So now it is largely basically, though it was called a student movement, but primarily it was basically driven by the radical Islamist groups. So Jamaat-e-Islami, of course, was there, and then there are a number of other terrorist organizations, radical organizations which are backed by Pakistan. And of course, Pakistan has also now come into big play in Bangladesh. And so we had done a series of conversation with Mr. Salahuddin Shoaib Chaudhry, who is editor of Brits in Bangladesh. So we had some very interesting revelations to make. But these are radical Islamists. And in China, within China, there is an issue about Uyghur Muslims, which are being, they have been facing a lot of oppression, and they are in conflict with the Chinese state authorities. And it's like, when they prop up a regime or when they are backing, the radical Islamist groups in Bangladesh, so wouldn't it come back to, bite them when this issue of Uyghur Muslims will come?
It will not.
Paradoxical situation, yeah. But for a normal person, yeah.
Yeah, it's a paradoxical situation, but look, China understands that money talks, money works. Why is it that Pakistan never complains about the sort of treatment which is given by in these concentration camps? And
None of the
there are
Islamic
horrendous
forces
stories.
actually.
Yeah,
None of
or
the
the
Islamic.
OIC, right? They never do. So China uses things very smartly. Look, technically, it's a Communist Party of China, which means that it has no religion. But then at the same time, it would play on religious divides in other countries. The same logic for using Islamists and Jamaat-e Islami and so on, right? Unfortunately, Bangladesh is sliding into a complete chaos, and there's Islamization happening. A few days ago, even women sports teams were banned from participating, etc. And Bangladesh had made great progress in ensuring that all the genders have equal rights, but now clearly that's backsliding, right? So that's China is going to continue its oppression against Uyghur Muslims, but at the same time, it will keep funding all these sorts of Pakistan, OICs, and so on, which is why there'll not even be a murmur against what China is actually doing within its own territory. Look, as you said, it had started with a student movement, but now, I was just quickly reading through today's and yesterday's news. A few quick points. Even though this was like so-called student movement, wherein the Bangladesh army really did not do anything, but Bangladesh's army chief has now warned that the country is at risk from infighting and bickering between political groups. This criticism comes amidst a surge in street violence and attacks on minorities in the country. So Bangladesh's descent into Islamist violence has actually shaken up the army chief, who had actually played a key role in the regime change last year. And General Zaman said, "We are going through a chaotic situation, criminals are taking advantage," warning that lawlessness could tear the country apart. Look, Bangladesh was created because they didn't want the imposition of Urdu on the Bengali speaking population. But now clearly they seem to be happy to just do anything and everything to go against India.
They
Fair
have
enough.
opened a Urdu department, department of Urdu language in every university, and they have
Absolutely.
official tie-ups with the Pakistan universities also.
So maybe they'll also change the name from Bangladesh to, I don't know, Urdu Desh or something like that. Because, well, if Bangla is no longer the factor as to why the country was created. So anyways, now Bangladesh is also saying that there's going to be a birth of a new political party, which will safeguard the young generation's contribution to the uprising which overthrew Sheikh Hasina's government. And Nahid Islam, a senior official in the interim government, had conveyed these sorts of plans to Kevin Kelly, the Irish ambassador to India and Bangladesh. So there's a utmost chaos. Why would the Yunus government, which is anyways an interim government, allow the creation of a new political party? Which means that clearly he's also not being able to control the lengths to which this so-called democratic revolution actually is going to. It's anything but a democratic revolution. Another thing, Sheikh Hasina's Awami League actually won landslide victory in the Bar Association elections in Bangladesh yesterday. So, which means that there's going to be a lot of churning. Difficult times ahead for India, of course, because even though India
I
doesn't
wanted to
even.
come to this thing. What are the options for India? So there are limited options, but how do you look at the options for India, especially in context of the growing Chinese play?
Right, right. See, India has always been open to discussions, right? Despite the fact that the visa center was India's visa center was burnt down in Bangladesh at the heights of this revolution. The fact still is that we still give visas, not as much as we used to give previously, but we still do give visas. So it's never like we have completely shut down. But yes, we had to reduce visas because our diplomats would also be scared for their own lives when there is so much of anti-India sentiment over there. China would churn out the anti-India sentiment, and look, this so-called revolution happened in an urban place, Dhaka, wherein the youth, just the way the youth does in any other country, they use all sorts of social media, Twitter and X. So a lot of these narratives or social media mobilization actually happened on Twitter, on X, on Instagram, on Facebook, and so on. Given the fact that Sheikh Hasina had refused to fully align with Beijing's strategic goals, such as granting military base access, rejecting a submarine base proposal in 2018, that could have made her a less reliable partner for China. And also, this rapid warming of ties between China and the Yunus government post this ouster, evidenced by Ambassador Yao Wen's meeting with Yunus as early as August 25th, 2024, subsequent economic pledges. All of these feed speculation that Beijing actually saw an opportunity in the power vacuum, and China's disinformation efforts in Bangladesh are a part of a broader strategy to expand its influence in South Asia, often leveraging very local dynamics, regional rivalries to shape narratives in its favor. China does use information manipulation as a tool to advance its geopolitical and economic interests. And since COVID-19, Beijing has shifted away from just merely promoting positive narratives about itself to more covert, disruptive operations, often inspired by Russian playbooks. In Bangladesh, this appears to manifest through a mix of economic leverage, engagement with local actors, subtle narrative shaping. Why are students visiting Bangladesh right now? Why would they be meeting the CCP officials, right? So narrative shaping can happen only through the youth. China would prefer this over overt, large-scale bot-driven campaigns elsewhere. So Chinese handles, even in the past, have been backing figures like activist Pinaki Bhattacharya to push campaigns such as boycotting Indian goods. All of these played out in the social media space. So economic ties provide another avenue. So, which is why, constantly pushing out the narrative that China is a better economic partner for Bangladesh and so on. Whereas the fact actually is that Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina at least, had actually handed over a BRI project to India, much to the angst of China, which is why it would want India out. So, what China does, it understands what could be the focal points or fissures in any country. Wherever there's youth bulge, as is the case in most cases in South Asia, it would use the information space to churn out this sort of disinformation that works. Is it really evidenced? Well, there's a lot of work which is ongoing, but given the fact that Western countries would rather focus on their own problems or Russian disinformation or Chinese disinformation, no one has really done like a full-fledged work on how Chinese disinformation actually turns the youth against India, right? Whereas India was the place where most Bangladeshi youth could actually afford education. For medical tourism as well, India still is just next door, right? But China would want to change all of that. Would it be successful? Let's wait and watch, because the sorts of geographic proximity also gives a lot of powers or a lot of advantages. If say person X in Bangladesh is sick and needs immediate medical attention, it would be easier for that person to actually come down to Kolkata rather than to go all the way to Beijing and so on. So there are things, we still have certain things. We've always wanted the best for Bangladesh. It's just unfortunate that everything that goes wrong, instead of the government actually taking responsibility for it clearly pushes it towards India, saying that, oh, India has a hand, India has done. Whereas India is really not interested. India has enough on its plate. It's really unfortunate, but I think we should just wait and watch. Things will fall into place sooner than later because China is far away. It can make a lot of pledges, but will it really fulfill it? If it had to fulfill it, all of the BRI projects would have been over by now, would have been completed, and Bangladesh would have been the most prosperous, one of the most prosperous countries in the world. But none of that has really happened. So I think India should just wait and watch.
I think, in fact,
And
you raised two very pertinent points on which we are going to discuss in future in two separate programs. One is basically that how China's BRI projects or Chinese financing has actually wrecked the economies of the countries. So
yes,
and the second is the Chinese disinformation campaign. That how carefully crafted their campaign is and how deeply entrenched they are now in the global media network also. And so, being a part of the media, as we had discussed, off camera also, that I have had the opportunity to have some glimpses of this global information or disinformation network of China. So, these are two very interesting topics which we'll take separately. And thank you very much, Dr. Pathak. It was an amazing conversation, and you broke down, you demystified a lot of things for our viewers. And if you have any questions for Dr. Pathak, you can, to our viewers, we just want to say that if you have any questions for Dr. Pathak, please share that in the comment box of this video when we post it. And we'll take these questions to Dr. Pathak and try to get answers for that. And thank you for watching. We'll be back soon with another issue, another podcast. And thank you very much once again, Dr. Pathak. Thank you.
thank you so much, Arunji, and thank you to all the viewers. Have a great evening.